We are the Ultramarines, the sons of Gilliman. Whilst we draw breath, we stand. Whilst we stand, we fight. Whilst we fight, we prevail. Nothing shall stay our wrath. This was said by Marnius Calgar. Hello, and welcome back to the Wisdom Warhammer channel. And in today's video, I'll be going over the history of the Ultramarines Legion. I will start off with their time during the Great Crusade before Roboute Guilliman was found, and then their time during the Great Crusade after Roboute Guilliman was found. I will then talk about their time during the Horus Heresy, and at the end I will go over the structure of the 13th Legion. Like in my previous videos, I do not own the artwork in the video, and all things Warhammer owned by Games Workshop and Black Library. So, with the intro out of the way, let's get the video started, shall we? Close to the end of the Unification Wars on Terra, the 13th Legion had one of the most stable gene seeds. The first 13th Legion Marines were aggressive, which was expected, but these Marines were drawn towards cohesion and respect towards hierarchy. Another trait that was shown was that they were dedicated to a specific goal during combat which bordered on pathological. But the early records of the 13th Legion were destroyed in the Siege of Terra, but here is the info we have. The recruitment of the 13th was all over the birth world of humanity, but they drew from the empires and nations that resisted the Emperor and the Imperium the most. As they took recruits from these places, they were named the Warborn, and the notable places were the sub-equatorial Maglev clans of Pam-Prokro, the war families of the Saragon enclaves, the Hive oligarchy of Mid-Afric, and the Afrophagic tribes of the Caucasus Wastes. There was a theory that the Warborn was used to deal with rebellions on Terra, but this is not confirmed. When the Legion went to the stars, they fought in the first pacification of Luna in the very brutal Sedna campaign at the edge of the Sol system. The number of war-born Marines numbered at 8,000 and rising, they began to earn their reputation alongside the other legions. As they worked with other legions who waged war in different ways, the 13th would learn from them and also implement these new ways of war. The notable battles that the Warborn fought in alongside the other legions were the liberation of Duranis and the destruction of the Sokovidian Xenos Empire. As the 13th Legion evolved, they began to fall into the categories similar to the Iron Hands, which was cold and tactical assaults, and the usage of technological superiority. During campaigns, they used a mixture of aggression and restraint alongside discipline and determination, which made them an effective military force when they were needed. The way the Warborn planned their battles was one of importance, as they laid out critical objectives, and each unit was used in combat would have a series of small objectives that would build into the Legion's main objective. After 30 years of service, the 13th Legion had built their reputation of tactical discipline, while the other legions saw them as reliable allies in combat. Sadly, they did have a pride which was similar to the Emperor's children, and like the 3rd Legion, they wore their trophies of their achievements on their armor. During the year of 833 M30, the 13th Legion had 30,000 Marines in their ranks, and their primary battle force was the 12th Expeditionary Fleet. The Legion always avoided wars of attrition, and when they used strategic goals with as few casualties as possible, as well as very little to no collateral damage, and they prided themselves on this kind of warfare. Their gene seed was still stable and was similar to the 1st Legion in gene seed stability, which allowed them to grow fast. Most of the time, the 12th Expeditionary Fleet was sent to fight in the intergalactic disk, and this was a tactical choice that the Emperor had made. The reason for this was because when a succession happened, the 13th was able to eliminate it quickly without too much damage, and were unstoppable until they were humbled in the Osiris cluster. The Osiris cluster was found in the 80th year of the Great Crusade, The inhabited worlds of the cluster were brought into the Imperium without bloodshed by the 13th. Eventually, they rebelled without any reason, and the 13th Legion returned to investigate, and they found out quickly. The Legion Master of the 13th, Gren Vossel, looked at the reports of the rebellion and began to position the fleet around the planet Septus 12. The void ships of the Legion rushed forward, abandoning the support elements, massive troop transports, and the forged ships of the Mechanicus. The Legion Master wanted to use the tactic of rapid spearhead attack that the 16th Legion uses. The main target was the atmospheric city called Cabasset, which was located on the night side of Septus 12 and was the economic and political city of the Osiris cluster. The first strike was from the Legion Goliath-class macro battleship called Senathal's Thunder, which quickly destroyed the orbital defenses of the planet and opened a hole in the outer hives. Eventually, a swarm of warborn stormbirds led by Gren landed and made their way to complete their objectives. They succeeded for a time until the people of the planet then started to slow the advance of the Legion with mining explosives and crude weapons. After some time, an unknown Xenos fleet in the shape of hourglasses arrived and began to attack the ships of the 12th Fleet, and hearing this, Gren called for a massive retreat. One of the Xenos ships retreated, but with the cost of the Legion fleet, and during the retreat, Gren realized he would die and he would give the command of the Legion to First Master Marius Gage. The Warborn was able to retreat, and they were ashamed by the defeat, and they lost 6,500 legionaries, and a quarter of the Legion fleet was lost due to their overconfidence. They thirsted for vengeance, but it would be denied to them because when they returned to the quarantine sector, they were reinforced by the elements of the 18th Legion, Solar Auxilia, and specialist anti-psyker units, but they found the worlds destroyed. The officiobiologist named the unknown Xenos as the Osirian Cybrid. Marius looked at the situation the Legion was in and began to rebuild it the best he could. One thing that was interesting that was happening in the shadows was that the Primarch of the 13th was already found by the Emperor a few years before the Osiris Cluster campaign. Eventually, the Legion was informed, and they felt hope, and from this event, it would be a bright chapter in the Legion history. Rabute Guilliman was the ruler of the biggest human empire called Ultramar, which was located in Segmentum Ultima, and with the brilliant mind of the 13th Primarch, he was able to make Ultramar run effectively. When the Warborn reunited with their Primarch, they learned from their father, and major changes would happen within the Legion. The Primarch's vision for his Legion was more than a military force. He wanted to make them exceptional, and he would make them extremely self-sufficient. Rabute Guilliman saw a military force as more than soldiers who carried dangerous weapons. He saw the supply lines, starships, and the worlds that would produce munitions and recruits. He made the capital world of Ultramar, named Macragge, the main world of the 13th Legion, and built the fortress monastery called the Fortress of Hera. Like the other Primarchs and their legions, Rabute restructured his legion and would turn the legion into a meritocracy and introduce the mindset of theoretical and practical within the legion, and this would make them more effective and dangerous in combat. With the Primarch at the head of the Legion, Marius and the other Warborn commanders agreed that the Legion would be named in honor of their father's empire and are now named the Ultramarines. Their symbol would be of the Ultima, which was an ancient symbol of human history. When the Ultramarines were ready to get back into the Great Crusade, they came out in force from Macragge. They were so effective that they brought so many worlds into the Imperium in such a short amount of time through diplomacy and war that it beat the records of other legions. A few years after the Legion met Macragge, the first batches of recruits would arrive and would be tested to become legionaries. With the constant supply of recruits from the 500 worlds of Ultramar, the legion would be numbered at 250,000 legionaries before the Isfanthri atrocity and Battle of Calth. The Ultramarines and their Primarch were there during the Ulnar Crusade and fought with courage and honor alongside the other legions and Imperial war assets. Then, after a few years after the Ulnar Crusade and the coronation of the War Master Horus, the Horus Heresy would begin, but I will be going over their notable combat engagements during the Great Crusade. Started off with the first pacification of Luna, and this was against the Selenar, and this was the first major Adeptus Astartes operation that required 3 legions. The Emperor had used the combined force of the 13th, 7th, and 16th legions. The 13th Legion alongside the 7th distracted the forces of the Selenar, while the 16th Legion drifted under the radar of the Selenar and were able to capture Luna. And after the battle, the 16th would be called the Luna Wolves. The next notable campaign was the discovery of the Osiris Cluster, which was the first time they went there, and it was a bloodless affair. The second time they returned to the cluster, it was when they fought the Osirian Cybrids and their mind-controlled thralls. Surprisingly, a few decades after the discovery of Rabutai Gelman, the Ultramarines and their Primarch would commit a massive war fleet against their old nemesis. With the newly restructured 13th Legion, they would systematically commit xenocide against the Osirian Cybrids. Here is how it went down. A sublead of the 12th Legion, under the command of Centurion Urad Krug, had found them and started fighting and called for aid to any nearby forces. Rabutai Gilman answered the call and told the 12th Legion force to hold them off, and he gathered a massive retribution fleet and went to Eurydice Terminal, which was where the Osirian Cybrids were located. The casualties of the 13th Legion was high, but they were able to eliminate their nemesis that had crushed their honor 6 decades earlier. Now, there was a subfleet that fought in the war against the Lords of Gardendal, and I did go over this war in my Iron Hands video. But to summarize the war, a fleet of Ultramarines under the command of Master Ulian Circes arrived to fight. This was after an Imperial diplomatic party's bodyguards had killed the Gardendal delegates, and when the Ultramarines arrived, they began to take over the surrounding planets. They were not able to take over the main planet, and they called for aid from the Gorgon and his legion, and a force of Emperor's children had arrived as well. During the final hours of the final battle, the Gorgon had given the Ultramarines the honor of being in the vanguard and were able to break through the enemy defensive lines. At the end of the battle, the 13th Legion would deal with the political stuff and assist in rebuilding the planet's government. Now, this next battle would be the one that caused a rift between the Ultramarines and Word Bearers, and this was known as the Raising of Monarchia. The Ultramarines didn't really kill anyone, they only destroyed the city, and I will go into more detail about it in the Word Bearers video. But the reason that the Emperor ordered this city to be destroyed was because the people here worshipped the Emperor as a god, even though religion was banned in the Imperium. Now, the Ultramarines and their Primarch didn't really feel anger toward the Word Bearers and felt a bit of sadness from destroying the city. After this, the Tesseract Compliance was the next joint operation between the 20th and the 13th Legions alongside their Primarchs. The planets of Tesseract were ruled by a totalitarian government that wanted to keep their power and was named the Conservation, and they were going to be dealt with by the 16th and War Master Horus. Instead, Horus sent the expeditionary fleets of Rabutai Gilman and his legion and Alpharius and his legion. Now, in councils, the Primarch of the 13th often berated the 20th Primarch. While the Ultramarines were fighting the forces of the Conservation, the 20th Legion hung back and launched probes and did raids on the enemy. Then, with one fell strike, the 20th Legion created anarchy on the main planet of the Conservation, and Rabutai and his sons calculated that 90% of the people would die on the planet. After this campaign, many of the other Primarchs, except Horus, criticized the actions of Alpharius and his legion. After this operation, the Ultramarines and their Primarch would not serve alongside the 20th Legion for the remainder of the Crusade. Now, the final battle that the 13th Legion would serve in was the cleansing of Argartia, and I mentioned this battle in my World Leaders video, but I will go into detail in this. The Ultramarines and their Primarch fought alongside the World Eaters and Angron and his sons, as well as the sons of Horus alongside the War Master himself. The Argatia military was crushed until they were able to hold back the Imperial advance at a massive fortress. Horus ordered Angron to take the fortress, and 12 World Eaters would die every meter, and it was so bad that a ramp of corpses was formed. But this ramp led up to a breach, and the enraged World Eaters and Angron charged in and slaughtered everyone, drenching the walls and grounds in blood. When the Ultramarines arrived, they would be horrified at what the World Eaters did, and from this, Angron would be called the Red Angel, and Guilliman would ridicule his brother and nephews. Now, the Ultramarines wouldn't find out about the Horus Heresy until the Battle of Calth, and this would be the bloodiest battle for the Ultramarines in the Horus Heresy. The Battle of Calth was where the Wordbearers would betray the Ultramarines and get revenge, and here is how it happened. Horus had ordered the two legions to work together in purging an Orc Empire in the nearby system, and Guilliman saw this campaign as a way to rebuild the relationship between the two legions. He was sadly mistaken as the legions met and mingled together. The Wordbearers and their cultists attacked the Ultramarines and their Imperial Guardsmen. It was bad. The defense matrix of the planet was disabled and taken over by the traitors, and they began to fire upon the fleet of undefended star forts and void ships of the Ultramarines. The cultists of the Wordbearers took over the landing zone, and with this, thousands of Wordbearers landed upon the planet. Eventually, the Ultramarines regrouped and fought back against the traitors, but Lorgar and his Wordbearers had summoned the Rune Storm, which divided the Imperium. Then, to make this worse, the Wordbearers had started shooting the sun with defensive weapons of the planet, which caused massive radiation upon the planet. This resulted in a war in the tunnels beneath Calth, and Lorgar escaped with his brother in pursuit with other Ultramarines. After the Battle of Calth, the Ultramarines would fight the Wordbearers and World Eaters in the Shadow Crusade. I explained the World Eaters' time during the Shadow Crusade, but for the Ultramarines they would be fueled and started throwing hands, bolters, and blades against the traitors with cold vengeance. The final showdown between the traitors and Ultramarines would be on the planet of Nuceria, where Angron and his legion would be given to the Blood God. Seeing that they could not win the battle, Guilliman and his sons retreated and returned to Ultramar to regroup and build. As the Ultramarines fortified the Ultramar Empire, and when they encountered Sanguinius and the Blood Angels Legion, they were brought to Mercrag and the two Primarchs talked. Then the Lion and the Dark Angels arrived, and the Imperium Secundus happened because they thought that the Throne World was destroyed and needed to keep the Imperial dream alive. Sanguinius was the Emperor, Guilliman ran the Empire, and the Lion was the general of the military, and the first threat was the Primarch Conrad Curz and warbands of traitors within Ultramar. For a majority of the heresy, the Ultramarines rebuilt and did their best to keep the remaining Imperial worlds defended, and then they received good news. After an argument between the Primarchs which resulted in the exilement of the Lion and the First Legion, the Lion returned and told that Curz's visions were proof that the Emperor was still alive. Immediately, the three legions prepared for war, and Imperium Secundus was dissolved, and they arrived at the planet of Davin, where the War Master was corrupted for the first time. During the Battle of Davin, the Ultramarines and the two other legions were able to open up the Rune Storm. Unfortunately, only one legion was able to go through the gap, and it was the Blood Angels, and while they were going through it, the Ultramarines and the Dark Angels fleet fought against the traitors. For the remainder of the Horus Heresy, the Ultramarines rushed to Terra with their Primarch fighting any traitors in their way, and eventually they came to aid the Throne World. They were too late, because Sanguinius was killed and the Emperor was crippled, but thankfully Horus was killed and they were able to push the traitors back. The Dark Angels and Ultramarines did most of the fighting in the campaign against the traitors, and it was named the Great Scouring, and during this time, Guilliman would introduce the Codex Astartes. After the heresy ended, the Ultramarines and their Primarch would do their best to keep the Imperium running during the Great Scouring and beyond. But I will go over that time in more detail in another video on the Ultramarines. And at this time, I will go over the notable engagements in the Horus Heresy. We will start with the Underground War of Calth, which was shortly after the main Battle of Calth and after the sun was attacked and it irradiated the surface. There were 40,000 Ultramarines that were forced to stay on Calth and fight the remaining 3,000 word bearers and their cultists and inhabit for 10 years before all traitors were hunted down and slaughtered. Then we have the Battle of Sotha, which was against a warband of Night Lords, and this is where the Pharos device was, which was a Xenos device later known to be of Necron making. The Pharos device was kind of like a beacon of some sorts, similar to the Astronomicon but not as powerful. The Night Lords were gathering info on the defenses of the planet for months, and when they attacked it, it was surprising to the small garrison located here. At the end of the battle, the loyalist Iron Warrior Barabbas Danciok overloaded the device, which rendered it inoperable, but from this choice, it would call something dark and bestial to the galaxy, but not until 10,000 years later. A force of 4th Ultramarines chapter called the Aurorans that were stationed at the Astigar garrison did a joint operation with a massive force of Imperial Fists. These loyalist forces attacked Chthoniya, which was the adoptive homeworld of Horus, and a war of attrition happened on this planet. While this battle happened, the Siege of Terra was happening, and with the arrival of a Dark Angel's fleet, the world of Chthoniya was destroyed. The victory for the Loyalists was labeled as a Phahiric victory, and Chthoniya was labeled a dead world. Now, the final notable battle of the Ultramarines was labeled as a return to honor, and it was a force of Ultramarines and other Loyalist forces led by Captain Praetor Acarus Odothanius. Acarus was a Marine from the 10th chapter of the Ultramarines Legion, and his force of brothers gathered a force of scattered Marines of the Loyalist side. They would harass the word bearers in the galactic northeast, and they would assault the word bearers' garrison on Honorum for 3 solar weeks. The word bearers were so desperate for aid, and their calls for aid were refused, and then they would summon demons and use weapons of the old night. With both sides using dark weapons, they would completely destroy the planet, but every traitor was slaughtered to a Marine and put to the cherry on top. The cities of Honorum were reduced to ash. Now going into the structure of the Ultramarines Legion, we will start with the Primarch Roboute Guilliman at the top. Under the Primarch are the Tetrarchs who served as rulers of the 4 main worlds of Ultramar: Saramanth, Konar, Oculata, and Iax, and they only answered to the Primarch himself. The Legates were the generals of massive battle forces of the Legion, which include Imperial Guard and naval assets. Under them are the chapter masters, who led 10,000 Marines, which were labeled as chapters, and within these chapters each company had 1,000 Marines led by a captain. These chapters were very effective and self-sufficient. They also had different specializations, and I will go over some of them right now, starting with the 4th chapter called the Aurorans. I mentioned these guys before, and this chapter have operated with 5 times more armored vehicles than other chapters. The 22nd, called the Nemesis chapter, were the chapter that had the most destroyer squads within the 13th Legion. Now, going into the different special units within the Ultramarines Legion, we have the Invitari, who were the finest warriors in the Legion, and they would eventually become the future leaders in the Legion. There was a subgroup within this unit called the Caesarian Invictarius, who was the personal guard of the 4 Tetrarchs of Ultramar, and they served as military commanders and arbiters of the law. The number of these warriors differed between the Tetrarchs. For example, Tetrarch Stolos Amatanius had thousands, while Tetrarch Ekatos Lamadia had only 100 of these warriors. Next, the Flumitarius were the Terminator elite of the 13th Legion, who were based off the Iron Warriors Terminator squads, who wore Tyrant pattern Terminator armor. This pattern of Terminator armor had the heaviest weapons that a Marine could carry, like the Reaper autocannon and Cyclone missile launchers, and were a well-coordinated assault squad and heavy artillery unit. The Locatarius units were the elite fast-moving squads that were drawn from the veteran assault squads and had small numbers within each chapter. Their commanders would keep them back and would use them when needed and in vanguard and strike operations, but use when the moment was right. The Evocati were the Ultramarines who would oversee the training of recruits upon the world of Armatura, and due to their job, they had the strongest fleet in Ultramar. The number of Ultramarines at the height of the Legion's power was at 250,000 legionaries, and this was a mixture of heavy weapons teams, assault teams, scout teams, and tactical squads. The Legion fleet had a small number of capital ships, but they had a lot of cruisers, frigates, and fast patrol vehicles, and these vehicles could be mass-produced by the many shipyards across the realm of Ultramar. The firepower of the fleet was mid-tier and was effective, but not on the level of the Imperial Fists and or Death Guard fleets. To summarize, the Ultramarines were the Swiss Army knife of the Adeptus Astartes, and the legions that they served under and they fought alongside saw them as a very effective units, and they respected them even though they had sort of like a pride to them, and they saw them as kind of like Boy Scouts, or yeah, that they saw them as Boy Scouts. But that is the summarizing of the Legion structure during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Now we have gotten to the end of the video and on the history of the Ultramarines Legion. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, hit the like button and send it to someone who would like this content. If you are new and would like to see more, hit the subscribe button and bell notification to be notified for when a new video comes out. I hope you guys have a good day, and I will see you in the next video. This is Wisdom Warhammer, signing off.